So I'll be providing you all with a report on the progress towards lake trout rehabilitation or restoration in Lake Michigan over the next 20 minutes or so. The plan of attack is to examine the time series for certain characteristics of the lake trout population in Lake Michigan and then assess the progress towards rehabilitation as defined by the implementation strategy written by Jim Dexter and others, a report that came out in 2011. So we'll look at the time series and see how close we are to meeting the targets as defined in the implementation strategy. This effort cannot be done without a whole bunch of agencies cooperating and collaborating to get these reports out. And I just want to acknowledge all of the agencies shown here. We're talking about tribal agencies, the Sault Ste. Marie tribes of the Chippewa Ottawa Indians, the Little Traverse bands of Ottawa Indians, the Grand Traverse band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, the Little River band of Ottawa Indians, as well as the DNRs for the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, and Indiana, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, of course, and USGS as well. So a whole bunch of agencies collaborating to get this report done every year to update you all on the status of lake trout. So the data that went into this report were from a number of sources, including the spring and fall gillnet assessment surveys that are done in the lake, as well as we drew from the other surveys that are targeting fish other than lake trout, such as the whitefish survey, that we were able to use some of that data in preparing this report. We examined the commercial harvest of trout in the lake, as well as the harvest from the recreational anglers, and looked at results from the Great Lakes Mass Marking Program, which is a program that surveys the fish caught from recreational anglers, and so that's incorporated into this report too. We'll be reporting usually by statistical districts, which are pictured on this map here. But we'll also have sometimes a look at specifically for the Northern Refuge, which is primarily in MM1, as well as the Southern Refuge, which is in statistical districts WM5 and MM7. And so the implementation strategy touches on the fish community objectives, and Nick just talked about the ones specifically for lake trout. That is, the lake trout should be in this range of somewhere between 0.54 and 1.7 million kilograms annually, as well as constituting 20 to 25% of the total salmon and trout harvest. And as he presented just a few minutes ago, in years 1985 to 2001, the annual lake trout harvest did fall within that range, as well as years 2013 to 2015. And it did fall within the 20 to 25% range in certain years in the 80s, a few years in the 90s, and in 2014. And here's a brief plot that shows those results. Again, meeting the FCOs for absolute harvest in those years in the 85 to 2000 range, and percentage-wise in a few years in the 80s and 90s. Another objective is with regard to the issue of a self-sustaining population. That's touched on in the implementation strategy. And there's some good news in this regard, in that the results from the Great Lakes Mass Marking Program for 2015 show that about 15% of the adult lake trout in Lake Michigan are now unclipped fish. This suggests a moderate degree of natural reproduction in the lake, as well as the results from the spring and fall survey show that there's in this range of right around 15% on the average that there are unclipped fish there. Most of the unclipped fish are from the southern part of the lake, so the highest percentage right now is about 45% for fish from the Illinois waters, followed by the southern refuge, which is in the 18 to 25% range, and then MM5 between 13 and 24%. However, the percent unclipped is quite a bit lower in the north, where we're averaging only between 3 and 5%. So again, if we look at the data, the red points are from the Great Lakes Mass Marking Program, whereas the black points are from the assessment surveys that are done in the spring and fall. And the overall pattern is a general increase in certain districts or areas of the lake, mainly between the last 5 to 7 years. And again, you can see the high point down in the southern part of the lake, primarily Illinois waters, as well as waters connected with the southern refuge. Also, the implementation strategy also briefly addresses the stocking targets. One target is that the annual stocking rate should not exceed 3.53 yearling equivalents, and the other target is an interim target of 2.74 million yearling equivalents. And we can see that we've never exceeded the maximum as mentioned in the strategy, but we have exceeded the interim strategy since 2005. And that's shown in this plot here. The red line is for the interim strategy of 2.74 million yearling equivalents, and the black line is for the maximum. You can also see that the biggest increase in the stocking rate occurred in the north, but there were also more moderate increases in the south as well, and an assortment of other districts in the lake. Okay, the strategy also mentions a mortality target that annual lake trout mortality should not exceed 40%, and based on the statistical catch-at-age models that haven't been applied to the lake trout populations, we are still above that target level and have been above it since 1999 in MM1, 2, and 3 pooled, but we are below that target in MM6 and 7, as shown here. So again, higher mortality in the north as opposed to the southern part of the lake. Okay, now getting into the evaluation objectives, the first one of which is that there should be an increase in the CPUE, or catch per unit effort, according to the spring assessment surveys, so that the average lake trout CPUE is above 25 fish per 1,000 feet of net. And we have not come close to meeting that target as shown in these time series here. We're well below that 25 fish per 1,000 feet of net based on the spring survey. However, the next evaluation objective is dealing with the fall spawner assessments, and that objective states that we should hit a target of 50 fish per 1,000 feet of net. And the good news is that we've basically, on an average basis, have been above that target for quite a while. In fact, maybe even going back to the late 90s, and that there are certain areas where we're well above it and other areas where we're closing in on it, except in the north. That's where we haven't come close to reaching that target of 50 fish per 1,000 feet of net. So again, in most areas we're above it, especially WM5, Julian's Reef, Arcadia, Sturgeon Bay, Milwaukee, Sheboygan, but we're below it in the Northern Refuge, as pictured in these time series here. So again, on a lake-wide basis, if we were to average all of these CPUEs from the fall, we'd be at 50 or above it for most of the time series here. But north is still a sore point where we're well below it. Now moving on to evaluation objective 3, and that is significant progress should be achieved towards attaining spawning populations that are at least 25% female fish, and also attaining an age structure in those spawning populations where there are at least 10 age groups older than age 7. And on a lake-wide basis, we've been at that 25% or above for most of the time series. And when we have looked at the age structures, there are certain areas, including Julian's Reef, the Southern Refuge, Waukegan Reef, and Sturgeon Bay, where we have attained at least 10 age groups older than age 7, but there are other areas where we have not reached that goal. So looking at the percent female, again, we're well above the 25% for most of the time series in all of the areas of Lake Michigan. Now looking at the age group breakdown, and I should point out that the Northern Refuge is not quite complete. Most of these fish are based on coated wire tags, but in the past, for Southern Refuge, Julian's Reef, when we have aged all of the fish, we have easily attained that 10 age groups older than age 7. Also at Sturgeon Bay, in the Southern Refuge, Julian's Reef, not there in some of the northern areas, although I expect some of those age groups to be filled out in the Northern Refuge as all the fish become aged, but we're still not there. You'll also note that the age structure for these northern populations are predominantly younger fish, but that's also a function of the big increase in the stocking rates that have occurred since 2009 in the north. A much bigger increase in the north than in the south. Okay, evaluation objective 4, and that is that there should be a minimum density of 500 viable eggs, and a viable egg is an egg with thymine levels above 4 nanomoles per gram in the priority areas, and this should be achieved by 2025. Well, we don't measure, in most of the areas, we don't measure egg densities, although we do have some egg density measurements for primarily Grand Traverse Bay and Little Traverse Bay, and in those areas we aren't even close to that target of 500 viable eggs per meter squared. In thymine, we have been over that target level of 4 nanomoles per gram during most of the time period between 2005 and 2012. However, there has been a recent drop in 2013 in a number of areas, as shown well, here are the egg densities, and you can see that we're well below that target of the 500 eggs per meter squared over the entire time series. Now, looking at the thymine levels in the eggs, we were at that or above that target in most of the areas from roughly 2005 to 2012, but you'll see that in most areas we get a drop down in 2013, and the reasons for this drop are not entirely clear. So, in summary, we are seeing an increase in natural reproduction of lake trout in Lake Michigan that has occurred primarily during the last 10 years. And this increase in the natural reproduction does coincide with low alewife abundance. Alewives have been at a reduced level since 2005, and they've even declined further since 2005 to the present time. So a lot of this natural reproduction that we are seeing does coincide with reduced levels of alewife abundance. According to the Great Lakes Mass Marking Program, 15% of the adult lake trout in Lake Michigan are now unclipped or wild fish, with the greatest rates of natural reproduction appearing to be in Illinois waters, followed by the Southern Refuge, and then MM8. The natural reproduction in the northern part of the lake has remained relatively low at this time. Annual mortality remains below target level of 40% in MM6 and 7, but above the target level in MM1, 2, and 3. The spring survey shows that we're not even close to that 25 fish per 1,000 feet of net, that target being reached. However, for the fall spawner survey target of 50 fish per 1,000 feet of net, we have been at that mark on a lake-wide basis, averaging across the lake. We have been at that mark for quite a while. Of course, the notable exception is the northern part of the lake, the northern refuge primarily, where we're well below that target. But in most other areas, we're well exceeding it or getting really close to being in it. Also, we have reached a target of 25% female, and we've been at that level for quite a while as well. So we're at that target level of 25% female as dictated in the implementation strategy. And we have reached a target of at least 10 age groups older than age 7 in certain areas of the lake, notably the Southern Refuge, Julian's Reef, Waukegan Reef, and Sturgeon Bay. And we seem to be getting closer to that even in the north. And with that, I conclude, and I'll be glad to answer questions at this time.